Right. Do you want to take over?
There wasn't a ghost.
I mean, I'm sure from that club it's just for sort of historic.
Do you want to take over?
Who's your other hand? I love when people ask me things that I don't know.
Do you know that little girl's name?
Kelly.
Kelly. Right.
This is not Laura.
But just a brief pause here, this isn't really our next location properly, we will be carrying on any moment. I've just stopped here because at this stage I am supposed to give you all a couple of warnings before we carry on any further. Now, the first thing is, I'm contractually obliged to point out to you now that we are about to cross the road. There it is then, fearsome as always. Oh, look, traffic there, marvellous. I mean, obviously though, now that I have officially drawn your attention to it, if anyone did want to attempt to be struck by a passing vehicle, that will be entirely their decision. But I would just say, if you could try to do it in a really horrible and messy way, everybody else will get their money's worth. And obviously, you know, if it's really spectacular, you may even feature in tomorrow night's Ghost Trial, which marvellous will turn up on YouTube, of course. The other thing, though, is that after we do cross over the road, we're going to start to go down a fairly short, but fairly dark, and fairly narrow passageway. Now, in the old days, if a gentleman dressed entirely in black and carrying a stick such as this one invited you to walk with him down a fairly short but fairly dark and fairly narrow passageway, the chances were that he was going to rob you. But of course, I have already done that. You're entirely safe for now. However, as we do wander down there, the more nasally observant amongst you, the more olfactorily gifted, might just detect a faint hint of garlic in the air. Now, that is a free service we provide on the show. It's there to help protect you from the various wandering spirits, vampires, demons, children of the night, all of these things that are said to be lurking down there waiting to get at you. So just a little level of protection, really, built into the service for you tonight. Now, you may find this hard to believe, but we have on occasion had the odd cynic, the odd unbeliever, who has attributed the smell of garlic to Caesar's Italian restaurant next door. But I can assure you this has absolutely nothing to do with it. When I was an apprentice for this job, I used to spend hours down there rubbing garlic into the floor. The times I've spent on my hands and knees down that alleyway trying to keep the management happy for the sake of my career. And not like that, man. Sorry about that. Right. We better carry on then, but one final thing is please do try to resist the urge to make silly faces into the window of the restaurant. We are more sophisticated than that on this particular tour. Thank you.
We're back. The lower back jump. I see. Now it's broken. I'm gonna sue you now. Wait till you're 18 and I'm gonna sue you.
You don't have any money.
I don't care.
What are you going to sue me for?
Depends. At least you have something. Saving anything?
No, nothing.
I'll make you save then.
We haven't seen this book.
Are we cold? I'm not freezing anymore. A bit better. This is my bag now. The punch stand's broken. No, just been standing and...
Standing up straight. Was it honestly looking?
No.
No.
I thought we
like my house
She
is just down the road
cooks.
from the we decided that to fill up the kitchen. We're going to go there for meals. Take the plate.
Speed down to IKEA. Yes, it's good. Break out the feather.
Brian.
Only one schmurgen this time.
That's good. Keep coming in. Careful of the railing on the way. Well, you may have noticed on the little plaque on the way in, we're now standing in the middle of a little area known as Bedern, B-E-D-E-R-N. It's an old Anglo-Saxon phrase, actually quite difficult to pronounce in Anglo-Saxon. Just about remember my old English. I think it was pronounced Bedern. And it means house of prayer, place of prayer. There's a church over at the other end. This building here is a church hall now. But actually the left-hand side there used to be used as a stable. And this right-hand bit was a tavern which was frequented by ladies of dubious morals. Persons of negotiable affection. So, if you're a gentleman, you can stable your horse there and avail yourself of the services offered for a fee next door here. Now, we're not certain, obviously, but we have researched this subject quite meticulously, and it seems that this building here may be the very first example in York of the park and ride system. Finally reached your level. Thanks. The actual reason we come here, though, is nothing to do with this in particular, but while Bedern as a whole, it's often noted for its fairly quiet, sombre atmosphere, and this, people claim, relates to its fairly terrible hidden history because, well, Bedern was one of York's nastiest Victorian slums. It was a small square into which very little sunlight ever entered. It contained the worst housing in Victorian York. Grey, flaking tenements, sheds and shacks littered the square like the yellowing tores of decayed teeth. A census report of 1841 described the population of the place as 342 persons. They all shared 3 lavatories. They used to keep pigs here, and consequently the dung would mound up just around where you're standing there. But in the winter the place would flood and become an open sewer with children playing in it, swimming in it, throwing pig excrement at one another. And it was into this fairly squalid, anaemic environment that in 1847 the guardians of the York parishes chose to locate the York Industrial and Ragged School, a notorious workhouse into which the poor people of the city were rounded up, kept as prisoners. Because in those days, poverty was a sin. These people, the old, the poor, the infirm, the unstable, the orphans, they lived a dreadful existence in workhouses just like these all the way across the country, but in this particular workhouse, in this particular square, worse was in store. Because one of the men who worked here had developed a cruel and heartless reputation. His name was Mr. Pym. He was in charge of the orphaned children, but it wasn't long before several of the orphans placed in his care started to vanish, with no explanation being offered by him. They seemed fairly certain, though, that he had simply allowed them to die. Through neglect and lack of attention, he would bury their bodies in and around the square outside, but in the winter, when the ground became as frozen and stiff as Mr. Pym's cold heart, he would throw their bodies into a large cupboard in the workhouse basement, awaiting the spring thaw. Now, back then in England, these children really were all alone in the world. They had nobody amongst the living even to question their whereabouts, and it's perhaps because of this single reason that strange and mysterious things started to happen in and around the workhouse. Now, to begin with, noises were heard coming from the cupboard where he was said to be storing the bodies, and these began with a faint, persistent tapping on the wood and a strange, mournful whispering sound, but fairly shortly the events would take on a much more sinister nature. The whispers turned to a loud, frantic screaming and shrieking. The tapping became a banging and pounding that